They told you history begins in the ruins of Egypt, in the legends of Mesopotamia, in the shadow of Atlantis. But what if the oldest memory of all was erased? Long before pyramids touched the sky, long before empires carved their names into stone, there was a continent bathed in light, a land where beings lived not in fear, but in harmony with the cosmos, a realm where consciousness shaped reality and wisdom flowed like rivers of starlight. They called it Lemuria, and though the world has tried to bury its name beneath oceans and silence, its echo still calls to us. Because Lemuria was not just a place, it was a way of being. And if you listen closely, you might realize you've been carrying its memory in your soul all along. Beneath the restless waves of the Pacific, there lingers a silence too heavy to be explained only by the tides. A silence that feels ancient, as though it carries the weight of memories deliberately erased. Across Polynesia, Hawaii, and Easter Island, elders whisper of a land that once was. A vast continent of light, a civilization older even than Atlantis, that stretched across the oceans and then was swallowed whole. Its name, Lemuria. For centuries, these whispers have been dismissed as myth. Just stories told around the fire, songs carved into chants, dreams born of salt and wind. Yet the consistency of these tales, spoken by people separated by thousands of miles of ocean, suggests otherwise. The Polynesian Mu, the Hawaiian Kamoana Nui, the Tamil legends of Kumari Kandam. Each speaks of a vanished homeland beneath the sea. Even European theosophists in the 19th century, like Helena Blavatsky and James Churchward, claim to have uncovered fragments of this lost story, painting Lemuria as a continent of peace, wisdom, and radiant beings of light. And though mainstream geology insists that continents cannot simply vanish without leaving scars across the planet's crust, the Earth itself seems to hum with counter-evidence. In the Indian Ocean, strange ridges and sunken plateaus defy easy classification. In the Pacific, vast undersea mountain chains stretch like the bones of something once whole. Fossils of lemurs in Madagascar and India, but not in Africa or the Middle East, gave rise to the very word Lemuria, as 19th century scientists puzzled over a land bridge that must have once connected these far-flung regions. But if Lemuria was more than legend, then why was it erased? Why do we find only fragments, folk songs, temple carvings, esoteric texts, while the continent itself lies hidden beneath the abyss? Some say it was swallowed by tectonic fire, others that it slipped beneath the waters during the same cataclysms that later claimed Atlantis. Yet there are older stories, far more unsettling. Stories that speak of deliberate forgetting, that what perished was not only a landmass, but a way of being, that Lemuria was not destroyed by nature alone, but by forces that feared what it represented. The whispers describe its people as luminous, attuned to both earth and stars, beings who lived not in dominance over nature, but in communion with it, their temples aligned with constellations long forgotten, their chants said to harmonize with the very heartbeat of the planet. Imagine for a moment an entire civilization not built on conquest, but on resonance, not ruled by kings or priests, but by the shared memory of light. If such a world truly existed, what would it mean for us now? And here lies the haunting possibility that the reason Lemuria is ridiculed, hidden, or denied is because its memory threatens the foundation of everything we've been taught. For if there was once a people who lived without war, without domination, without fear, then perhaps our history is not a straight line of progress at all, perhaps it is a spiral, and we are only now circling back to remember. Somewhere beneath the waves, the silence still waits, and the question is not whether Lemuria is gone. The question is, are we ready to remember what it has left behind? Beneath the shifting tides of time, there lingers a silence deeper than the sea, a silence that belongs to a world erased, a world said to exist long before Atlantis claimed its place in myth and memory. That world is Lemuria. To some, it was merely a landmass swallowed by the ocean, a scientific speculation from the 19th century when zoologists puzzled over the spread of lemurs across continents. But to mystics, visionaries, and indigenous traditions, Lemuria was not a mistake of geology. It was the first great civilization of light, a seed of wisdom planted long before Atlantis rose. The story of Lemuria is not separate from Atlantis, but intertwined, like the inhale before the exhale. Atlantis has dominated legends, remembered as a kingdom of power, science, and downfall. But Lemuria, in its whispers, is remembered as softer, older, more attuned to spirit than matter. Where Atlantis would embody intellect, technology, and dominion, Lemuria embodied intuition, harmony, and communion. One could say Atlantis was the mind, while Lemuria was the heart. Helena Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, spoke of root races, cycles of human evolution stretching across vast epochs. She placed Lemuria as the third root race, a bridge between primal humanity and the advanced Atlanteans. Whether one takes her words as myth or metaphysics, they place Lemuria in the cosmic story not as a footnote, but as a foundation. It was said to be a land where beings were not yet fully material, where consciousness shaped form, and where communion with higher dimensions was as natural as breath. In esoteric teachings, Lemuria represents the archetype of innocence, humanity's first collective flowering before the trials of duality hardened into history. If Atlantis became the story of knowledge misused, Lemuria was the story of light unguarded, a civilization whose gift was connection to earth, to spirit, and to each other, and whose downfall was not war or hubris, but forgetting. Modern mystics like Rudolf Steiner spoke of Lemuria as the age when humanity first discovered the fire of self-awareness, the spark that would later burn brightly and sometimes destructively in Atlantis. In this way, Lemuria's place in the cosmic story is not only about a lost land, but about us. It is about the heart that beats before the mind calculates, the song before the words are written. And though its temples are said to be buried beneath waves stretching from the Indian to the Pacific, its memory endures, carried in fragments of myth, in the chants of Polynesian elders, in the wisdom of shamans from Mu, and in the quiet intuition of seekers who feel, even if they cannot prove, that there was once a light before Atlantis. They say Lemuria was not merely a continent, but a vibration, a resonance that stretched across oceans and into the hearts of all who lived there. Unlike the dense and fractured energy of our modern world, the pulse of Lemuria was said to be unified, harmonized, attuned to the very heartbeat of the cosmos. Imagine a land where spirit and matter were not divided, where the air itself shimmered with an awareness that carried you gently, reminding you that you were never separate from the divine. Legends tell us that the Lemurians were beings of light, not in the sense of glowing bodies, but in the purity of their consciousness. They were said to communicate not through words, but through vibration, song, and direct transmission of thought. Their language was music, their architecture aligned to the sacred geometry of the stars, and their daily lives were rituals of harmony with the earth. The very stones they walked upon, it is said, retained memory. Crystalline structures humming with frequencies that carried wisdom beyond the reach of language. Mystics and esoteric researchers like Rudolf Steiner and later Helena Blavatsky suggested that Lemuria was not only a physical place, but also a stage in human consciousness itself, a realm where humanity had not yet hardened into individual egos, but lived in a state of shared awareness. They were children of the earth and stars at once, dwelling in a luminous innocence, where the boundary between the seen and unseen was thin as mist. To live in Lemuria was to live in song, to breathe in rhythms that kept one in tune with the pulse of creation. Modern seekers often speak of Lemurian codes, suggesting that the vibration of that lost continent still lingers within us, hidden deep in our DNA. They say it awakens in dreams, in moments when we feel the pull of the ocean, or when we encounter crystals etched with mysterious lines, Lemurian seed crystals, believed by many to carry the frequency of that forgotten land. Whether myth or memory, these whispers remind us that there was once a time when humanity lived not in conflict with the earth, but in resonance with it. The land of light, as the elders called it, may have vanished beneath the waves, but its song has not been silenced. It still moves like an echo beneath our lives, waiting for those with the ears to listen, and perhaps to remember. When a civilization fades from the physical world, it does not simply vanish. Its echoes remain, woven into the myths, symbols, and half-forgotten stories carried across oceans and generations. Lemuria, though erased from maps and denied by historians, survives in these fragments, encoded like sacred messages waiting to be unlocked. Ancient myths of a lost paradise, a radiant land swallowed by the sea, recur across cultures. In Polynesian legends, we hear whispers of Hawaii, the mystical homeland from which all life emerged. In Tamil tradition, the Sangam texts tell of Kumari Kandam, a vast continent south of India lost to the waters, a striking mirror of Lemuria's story. These are not mere coincidences. Myths endure because they hold truths that refuse to die. They become vessels of memory when history is buried or forbidden. And so, Lemuria lives on, not in the rigid halls of academia, but in the stories mothers whispered to their children, in chants sung under starry skies, in symbols carved into stone. The Maya spoke of a land of the first dawn, while Aboriginal Australians sang of dreamtime continents that vanished beneath the waves. Even Plato's account of Atlantis carries undertones that resonate with Lemurian echoes, a memory of a great world that fell, leaving humanity both haunted and hungry to remember. What if these fragments were not scattered at random, but intentionally hidden, like pearls placed along the shoreline for us to rediscover? Myths are more than fantasy. They are coded instructions for memory. They speak to us in symbols because symbols transcend the erosion of language and time. The serpent, the spiral, the lotus rising from water. These motifs appear again and again across cultures that never met, as if each holds a key to the same forgotten library. Lemuria survives because memory is resilient. No flood, no empire, no academic erasure can fully extinguish what was once aligned with truth. The fragments endure because our souls recognize them. When we hear the story of a radiant land lost to the sea, something deep within us stirs. Not curiosity alone, but remembrance. Perhaps because in some way we were there. And so, Lemuria whispers through the myths, not as history confined to the past, but as an invitation in the present, to listen, to decode, to remember what has always lived inside us. They say most civilizations build their power on stone, iron, or fire, but the Lemurians built theirs on something softer, almost impossible for our modern world to measure. They built it on the heart. According to Helena Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, the Lemurians were the third root race, beings whose physicality was still heavy and immense, but whose inner senses were wide open. Their bodies were larger than ours, some say towering like giants, yet their consciousness pulsed with an innocence and receptivity that allowed them to feel the heartbeat of the earth itself. James Churchward's writings on Mu echo this, describing a people who saw themselves not as separate from the land or sky, but as extensions of it, like waves to an ocean. This was not a civilization obsessed with conquest or accumulation. It was a civilization that knew harmony was strength. The Lemurians were said to practice a form of collective telepathy, not just transmitting thoughts, but emotions, sensations, and even visions across distances. Imagine walking through a forest and instantly feeling the joy of someone harvesting fruit miles away, or the sorrow of another as they mourned by the sea. In such a society, deception was almost impossible. The very fabric of daily life was woven from trust, transparency, and the resonance of shared feeling. Many esoteric schools, including Rudolf Steiner's anthroposophy, describe Lemuria as a time when humanity's spiritual senses were more developed than physical ones. They navigated not with maps, but with intuition. They healed not with instruments, but with vibration and intention. Their temples, if they can be called that, were not buildings but circles in nature where the earth's energy converged, amplifying the currents of life that they could perceive as clearly as we perceive light. And perhaps this is why the memory of Lemuria still calls to us, because we, in our modern world of walls and separation, still ache for what they once embodied. The possibility of living not as isolated minds, but as a single organism of heart-connected beings. The Lemurians were different because they remembered something we have forgotten, that the heart is not just an organ pumping blood, it is an instrument of communion, a temple of knowing. And when a whole civilization tunes itself to that frequency, the world itself begins to sing. They say the Lemurians lived in harmony not only with the earth, but with the very fabric of vibration itself. To them, reality was not made of solid matter, but of tones, frequencies, and luminous currents of light. They understood what modern physics has only begun to rediscover, that sound and light are not just phenomena to observe, but forces that can shape the body, the mind, and even the soul. In Lemurian life, healing was never about isolating symptoms or cutting away illness. It was about restoring resonance. If the body was seen as an instrument, then disease was simply a string out of tune. The healer's role was not to fight or to conquer, but to gently bring the person back into alignment with the natural song of creation. Ancient oral traditions, carried down through Polynesian, Hawaiian, and Aboriginal cultures, still whisper that the Lemurians used their voices as sacred tools. Chanting was not for entertainment, it was medicine. The tones carried specific frequencies that could soothe pain, regenerate tissues, or open the subtle energy centers we now call chakras. Some scholars point to the Hawaiian practice of oli chanting and the Maori karakia prayers as distant echoes of these Lemurian practices. But the Lemurians went further. Light itself was their ally. They worked with the rising sun as though it were a living temple, drawing down its rays not only as warmth, but as nourishment for the spirit. It is said they understood how the spectrum of light could restore balance, red to ground, blue to calm, gold to awaken. This sacred science of color and light was not intellectual theory. It was lived practice. Archaeologists exploring megalithic sites in the Pacific often note unusual acoustic properties, chambers that seem to amplify sound in perfect harmonics. Could these be remnants of Lemurian temples, built to channel tones and light into the human body and consciousness? It remains a mystery, yet one that resonates with their philosophy. That healing was not mechanical but vibrational, not a fight against nature, but a remembering of one's natural harmony. The sacred science of Lemuria reminds us that the universe is always singing, always shining, and that to heal is not to force change, but to step back into the song. From the earliest myths of humanity, the stars have been more than distant fires. They have been teachers, guardians, and mirrors of our own unfolding journey. For the Lemurians, this relationship with the cosmos was not metaphorical. It was lived, practiced, and woven into the rhythm of their lives. They believed their very existence was interlaced with the constellations, each star a radiant temple of consciousness, each movement in the sky a message to be received with reverence. When they lifted their eyes to the heavens, they did not see emptiness. They saw family, they saw memory, they saw home. The Lemurians' understanding of cosmic communion was not based on conquest or cold observation, but on relationship. Ancient traditions across the Pacific echo this truth. Navigation guided not only by the placement of stars, but by a sense of spiritual alignment with them. To commune with the stars was to listen, not to calculate. It was to feel the pull of their energies as tides within the soul. In the Lemurian worldview, the constellations were living beings, emissaries of higher wisdom, shaping the destiny of Earth, just as the moon shapes the sea. Sound and ritual formed the bridges to these celestial companions. Through chants and harmonic resonance, Lemurians would align themselves with the vibration of starlight. They believed sound itself could call forth star consciousness into the body, awakening memory of the soul's journeys beyond Earth. This practice finds echoes in Vedic teachings of Nada Brahma, the universe as sound, and in the Polynesian traditions of star chants passed orally for generations. In Lemuria, these songs were not only tools of guidance, but initiations into cosmic kinship. They spoke often of Sirius, the Pleiades, and Orion, not as remote lights, but as ancestral lineages. The Pleiadians especially were remembered as guides who walked with them in dreams, teaching agriculture, healing, and spiritual discipline. Modern esoteric traditions often return to these same star systems as sources of hidden knowledge, a continuation of what Lemurians already understood. Earth was never isolated. It was part of a greater family of evolving consciousness. This communion gave them a sense of belonging that transcended geography. They were not merely citizens of Lemuria. They were children of the stars. And in every ritual, in every gaze upward, they remembered. The cosmos was not above them. It was within them. In the memory of Lemuria, crystals were not mere ornaments or tools for simple adornment. They were living libraries, repositories of knowledge, and bridges between realms. Imagine a civilization that understood quartz not only as a stone, but as a transmitter of thought, memory, and intention. Lemurians worked with crystals as one might work with books, or with instruments of science, refining their vibrational codes to heal, to store knowledge, and to amplify the consciousness of their entire society. Legends suggest that great crystalline temples rose from the earth, built on natural energy nodes where ley lines converged. These were not places of worship in the sense we know today, but hubs of resonance, where the frequencies of Earth and cosmos were harmonized. Within these sanctuaries, massive crystals acted like tuning forks, channeling the planet's subtle forces and redistributing them in patterns that supported harmony, fertility, and spiritual expansion. Each crystal grid was aligned to constellations above and tectonic plates below, forming a network of communion between Earth and stars. Modern research has only begun to glimpse what the ancients might have known. Quartz, when subjected to pressure, emits an electrical charge, a phenomenon known as piezoelectricity. Could it be that Lemurians mastered this natural property, embedding crystals into their cities to generate energy, light, or even communication systems? Some traditions whisper of crystalline devices that allowed for long-distance telepathy, or even travel through altered states of consciousness. But perhaps the most profound aspect of this technology was its intention. Crystals were attuned not just to physical frequencies, but to the consciousness of those who wielded them. Lemurians approached them with reverence, treating each stone as a sacred ally. Through meditation and sound, they programmed crystals with healing vibrations, creating fields that could restore balance to the body or open pathways into higher dimensions. These crystalline grids were not machines. They were symphonies, orchestrated by the unity of human will and natural order. When Lemuria declined, it is said much of this crystalline technology was buried deep within the earth, or hidden beneath the oceans, still humming faintly beneath our feet. Some even believe that certain crystals we hold today, clear quartz, moldavite, Lemurian seed crystals, carry imprints of that forgotten knowledge, waiting for humanity to remember. The grids are not lost. They are simply dormant, awaiting the moment when our consciousness matures enough to awaken them again. And in that awakening lies the possibility of rediscovering not just technology, but the harmony between matter and spirit that the Lemurians once embodied. Beneath the soft glow of ancient fires, Lemuria held a memory that the modern world has nearly forgotten. A memory carried not in temples of stone, but in the hearts of the women who became vessels of divine truth. They were the priestesses of Mu, guardians of a wisdom so delicate and yet so powerful that it pulsed through every aspect of life. These women were not bound by hierarchy or dogma. Instead, they lived as bridges between the human and the divine, walking embodiments of balance, intuition, and sacred presence. Their role was not to dominate, but to harmonize, to hold together the unseen threads of spirit and matter. The Lemurian priestesses were initiates of the divine feminine, a principle that transcended gender, yet found its fullest expression through the womb, the heart, and the intuitive mind. In their circles of prayer and song, they invoked the rhythms of the cosmos, aligning their bodies with the movements of the moon, the tides, and the seasons. They understood that creation itself was a sacred dance, and that to give life, to nurture, and to heal were not simply tasks of women. They were cosmic acts. Modern scholars such as Maria Gimbutas, who explored the symbols of Neolithic goddess cultures, remind us that ancient civilizations often placed the feminine at the center of spiritual life. Lemuria, too, seemed to carry this archetypal truth. Their wisdom was transmitted not through books or rigid teachings, but through presence and vibration. A glance, a touch, a chant, these carried codes of remembrance. The priestesses worked with water as memory, with crystals as amplifiers, and with voice as a conduit of spirit. They saw the body not as a vessel of sin, but as a temple of resonance, each cell capable of vibrating with the song of the stars. It was said that when the people of Lemuria faced turmoil, it was the priestesses who gathered to restore balance. They did not wield weapons or laws, but instead gathered in sacred silence, tuning their hearts to the frequency of the cosmos until harmony returned. Their authority was invisible yet undeniable, a power that flowed not from control, but from surrender to the divine order. To remember the priestesses of Mu is to remember that true wisdom does not come from accumulation, but from receptivity. It is to recall that the divine feminine lives not only in the past, but in the present moment, in every breath, in every act of compassion, and in every awakening of the heart that dares to listen deeply once again. Beneath the emerald canopy of Lemuria, life unfolded in a rhythm so natural, so deeply woven into the pulse of the earth, that the very idea of separation did not exist. Every tree, every stream, every stone was seen as alive, imbued with spirit. And the Lemurians understood that to harm one thread of this living web was to fray the entire tapestry of existence. Their civilization was not built on conquest or extraction, but on reciprocity. They lived by an unspoken covenant with the earth, to give as much as they received, to listen before they acted, and to walk gently so that future generations would inherit a flourishing world. In this harmony, there was no boundary between the human and the natural. The Lemurians saw themselves as caretakers, not masters. They believed that the earth breathed with them, that its rivers flowed through their veins, and that its forests whispered wisdom into their dreams. This wasn't mere poetry. Modern studies in ecopsychology and indigenous cosmologies echo this truth, that a deep sense of belonging to nature is essential for both mental balance and spiritual awakening. Ancient traditions from Polynesia to the Andes preserve fragments of this memory, teaching us that to honor the earth is to honor ourselves. Their daily life reflected this communion. Temples were aligned not only with the stars, but with rivers and mountain ranges, creating an unbroken circuit between heaven and earth. Food was grown in ways that replenished the soil rather than depleting it. Medicine was drawn from plants, but always with prayer, gratitude, and intention. And because of this sacred relationship, illness was rare and scarcity almost unknown. In such a world, the illusion of isolation had no root. A Lemurian child would have been raised knowing that the bird overhead, the wave crashing on the shore, and the sun dipping into the horizon were all family. Death itself was not feared, for it was understood as a return to the larger circle of life, another phase of the eternal exchange between spirit and matter. Perhaps this is the greatest teaching Lemuria offers us, that separation is an illusion, and harmony is our natural state. To walk in balance with nature is not only to preserve the planet, but to rediscover the wholeness within ourselves. And though Lemuria may have vanished beneath the sea, its song of oneness still echoes in the wind, calling us to remember. The memory of ancient harmony lingers like a half-forgotten song, but history reminds us that balance, no matter how divine, has always faced disruption. The Great Rift was not born from a single event, but from a slow unraveling of unity, where human desire began to outpace wisdom. In the earliest civilizations, records hint at moments when power shifted from serving the sacred to serving control. Sumerian tablets speak of kings who once called themselves shepherds of the people, yet soon began calling themselves gods. Egyptian inscriptions revealed dynasties that started with devotion to Ma'at, truth and cosmic balance, but descended into tyranny, where monuments became less about the eternal and more about ego. It was here, in these subtle turns, that the seeds of separation were sown. This fracture was not merely political or social, it was spiritual. Humanity, once attuned to cycles of the moon, rhythms of planting and harvest, and whispers of stars, began to lose its listening. As cities expanded, walls were raised, both of stone and of thought. Nature became something to dominate rather than commune with, and the sacred feminine, long venerated in the form of goddesses and earth mothers, began to be silenced under patriarchal systems. What had once been seen as balance, the dance of sun and moon, masculine and feminine, spirit and matter, slowly tilted into hierarchy and control. Mystics across traditions warned of this rift. In the Vedic texts, sages wrote of Kali Yuga, the age of decline, where truth becomes obscured and humanity forgets its essence. In Greek philosophy, Hesiod described a shift from the golden age of harmony to the iron age of struggle and strife. Even the Maya, whose calendars mapped cosmic cycles with precision, foretold times when humanity would drift into darkness, forgetting its connection to the cosmos. The Great Rift is not just history, it is a pattern, a reminder that whenever humanity strays too far from nature and spirit, consequences follow. The skies themselves mirrored this imbalance, as records of strange celestial alignments, comets, and eclipses were often seen as omens of disruption. And yet, even in the breaking, seeds of renewal were hidden. For every collapse carries within it the possibility of awakening. The Great Rift was not the end. It was the beginning of a test, asking whether humanity would remember its place within the great harmony or sink deeper into illusion. The chronicles of Atlantis speak of a time when the golden age of harmony and wisdom began to waver, not because of a sudden collapse, but because of an arrival. A new power, a rival civilization, emerged on the horizon, carrying with it both brilliance and ambition. This was no mere migration of people, but the dawn of a challenge that tested the very fabric of Atlantean ideals. Ancient records echoed faintly in the fragments of Egyptian texts and Sumerian myths hint at an external force that brought technologies and practices unfamiliar to Atlantis, yet alluring in their promise of power. At first, they were welcomed. Knowledge was always sacred to the Atlanteans, and these new arrivals seemed to carry secrets that even the priest-kings had not yet unveiled. But woven into their wisdom was something else. An energy less concerned with balance, more concerned with dominion. The shadows of this rival civilization can still be felt in the myths of fallen gods, who arrived from the sea, bearing fire and metal. Some scholars link these accounts to the mysterious Olmec and pre-Mayan influences, others to the enigmatic people of the serpent described in global mythologies. They offered gifts that dazzled, weapons sharper, symbols stronger, mathematics more precise. Yet within these offerings was a subtle shift. Instead of being used to honor the divine flow, they were designed to bend nature to human will. It was the first seed of separation, planted not by accident, but by intention. Atlantean society split in its response. Some embraced these new teachings, arguing that Atlantis could maintain its spiritual integrity while integrating this power. Others warned that to deviate from harmony, even slightly, would fracture the covenant between humanity and the cosmos. The debate grew into division, and the division into quiet conflict. The rival civilization did not overthrow Atlantis by force. Instead, it introduced doubt, ambition, and hunger for control. These were invisible weapons, far more dangerous than steel. As the balance tilted, the once clear waters of Atlantean purpose grew murky. No longer was every act of life aligned with sacred unity. A shadow had fallen across the temples. It was not yet the end, but it was the beginning of forgetting. The slow unraveling of a world that once knew itself as whole. And in that forgetting, the true fall had already begun. Across the wide sweep of the Pacific, whispers linger of a continent that once stretched like a bridge between distant lands, binding Asia to the Americas in ways our present maps cannot show. The name that survives is Mu, etched into myths from Polynesia to Mesoamerica, and preserved most controversially in the writings of James Churchward, who in the early 20th century claimed to have translated tablets that spoke of a vanished Pacific empire. While historians debate the accuracy of his work, the resonance of Mu as a lost cradle of civilization refuses to fade. In Polynesian chants and Hopi oral traditions, there are echoes of a land that burned, shook, and finally sank beneath the ocean waves. The legends describe Mu's destruction not as an isolated disaster, but as a cataclysm that shifted the balance of the earth itself. Some say volcanic fire erupted from within its heart, tearing its cities apart in blinding storms of ash. Others speak of rising waters, waves so high they swallowed mountains, leaving only archipelagos like Hawaii and Easter Island as remnants of the once great land. The combination of fire and water, a dual assault of the elements, became the symbol of Mu's fall. It was as if the earth itself rebelled against a civilization that had strayed too far from harmony. In esoteric traditions, Mu's demise was seen as more than geology. It was karmic. Some mystics taught that the people of Mu had unlocked secrets of spiritual power, but chose to wield them in arrogance, bending nature to their will rather than walking alongside it. Their misuse of energy, whether through temples aligned to cosmic currents or devices lost to time, created an imbalance that reverberated through the planet. When their wisdom curdled into pride, the laws of nature demanded balance, and the continent became sacrifice. Yet, not all was lost. In the aftermath, survivors are said to have sailed outward, carrying fragments of knowledge to the coasts of the Americas, to the islands of the Pacific, even to the temples of Asia. Petroglyphs, pyramids, and oral chants hint at a scattering of seeds, reminders that Mu's essence did not vanish, but was spread like embers on the wind. Even the very name Lemuria, often tied to Mu, suggests a place that lingers like a ghost, half-remembered yet ever-present beneath the waves. What remains today is mystery. The ocean keeps its secrets well, but the stories endure, whispering of a land consumed by fire and swallowed by water, and of a lesson humanity cannot afford to forget. When civilizations forget the balance of earth and spirit, even continents can fall. They say exile is not just a matter of geography. It is a wound carved into the memory of a people. When the continent of Mu fell into the embrace of the sea, the Lemurians who survived carried with them more than fragments of a drowned homeland. They carried the resonance of their temples, the breath of their chants, the knowledge etched not onto scrolls, but into their very cells. Scattered across the earth, they became wanderers, their destiny intertwined with new lands, new tribes, and new beginnings. Many traditions whisper that these exiles were the seed-bearers of civilization. Some traveled east, landing upon the coasts of what would one day be South America. In the Andean highlands, the myths of Viracocha, And the white-robed teachers recall strangers who came from the sea after a great flood. Others traveled westward into India, leaving traces of their knowledge within the Vedas. Subtle echoes of cosmic cycles, sacred geometry, and rituals of sound. Even Polynesian voyagers preserved legends of ancestors who once hailed from a sunken homeland, keeping the name of Lemuria alive through chants passed across the waves. But exile is never only a story of transmission, it is also a story of grief. Imagine the Lemurian priests standing on the decks of carved ships, watching their sacred mountains disappear beneath a storming horizon. Their cries would have mingled with the wind, their sacred songs with the thunder. The memory of Mu became a ghost that haunted their bloodlines. They could not return, yet they could never fully belong to the new lands they settled. This duality of carrying the old while forging the new gave rise to hybrid cultures where myth and memory fused. Modern esotericists like Helena Blavatsky and James Churchward claimed that the Lemurians were custodians of lost wisdom, the keepers of spiritual technologies that could one day awaken humanity again. Whether fact, allegory, or both, the myth of their exile reminds us of the resilience of spirit. For knowledge can be drowned, but it cannot be destroyed. It travels in the breath of storytellers, in the hands of builders, in the quiet spark of a child born generations later, who suddenly remembers a world they never saw. Perhaps that is why, when we encounter myths of sunken lands, something stirs deep within us. We too are descendants of exile, souls who have wandered across ages, carrying fragments of forgotten homes. And maybe the Lemurians, scattered but unbroken, are not just ancestors of the past, but mirrors of what we are becoming. The idea that humanity has forgotten its ancient past is not just the domain of myth. It is a recurring theme found in sacred texts, esoteric traditions, and even the subtle symbols of modern psychology. Across cultures, from the Vedas of India to the Gnostic Gospels and the Hermetic teachings of Egypt, there is the repeated claim that humanity once carried a memory of the stars, a remembrance of the soul's true origin, but that this knowledge was veiled. Why? Some traditions say it was a cosmic necessity, while others insist it was a deliberate act of control. The Hindu concept of Maya describes the world as a veil of illusion, a kind of cosmic forgetfulness that keeps us focused on the material realm. In the Orphic mysteries of Greece, souls drank from the river Lethe before reincarnating, erasing memory of their divine home so they could fully inhabit a new life. In Gnosticism, the archons were said to cast a net of ignorance upon humanity, ensuring that the spark of the divine remained hidden under layers of illusion. Each of these echoes suggests that forgetting was not an accident, but a condition built into the human journey. Carl Jung wrote of the collective unconscious, a buried layer of archetypes and memories shared across humanity. Some esoteric scholars interpret this as the residue of Lemurian and Atlantean ages, memories that live in us but cannot be accessed directly because of a kind of seal. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, spoke of vast halls of records, Atlantean and Lemurian knowledge, buried in Egypt, Yucatan, and under the Sphinx, waiting for humanity to remember when the time was right. The implication is that forgetting was temporary, a pause in the cycle of remembrance. And yet, forgetting has a purpose. Without it, life might feel unbearable, weighed down by the echoes of countless lives, losses, and betrayals. To forget allows us to begin again, to engage with life freshly. But the seal was never meant to be permanent. The great teachers, Hermes, Buddha, Jesus, pointed toward remembrance. They whispered that what was forgotten could be awakened, and that every synchronicity, every dream, every déjà vu was a crack in the seal. So perhaps we are not meant to live forever in forgetfulness. Perhaps forgetting is the cocoon, and remembering is the emergence. And when we remember, not just as individuals, but as a species, what will happen then? The seal will break, and the great story we lost may rise again. The air of our present moment carries a quiet tension, as if something long forgotten is stirring again. Across cultures and epochs, the feminine voice was once the heartbeat of spiritual life, guiding with intuition, tending to balance, holding the wisdom of cycles, and keeping alive the mysteries of birth, death, and renewal. Yet much of that sacred knowledge was buried, silenced, or rewritten under patriarchal orders. Temples were razed, priestesses defamed, and the codes they carried, those living teachings of lunar rhythm, divine embodiment, and inner knowing, were driven underground. And still, they endured, hidden in the folds of folklore, whispered in lullabies, traced in the geometry of ancient altars, waiting for the time when humanity would be ready to receive them once more. That time is now. You can sense it in the rise of women reclaiming their place, not just in leadership, but in spirit. The language of cycles, of lunar calendars and womb mysteries, of earth-based medicine and dream interpretation is returning to collective memory. Anthropologists remind us that before organized dogma, the earliest spiritual traditions revolved around the Great Mother, the cycles of the moon, and the priestesses who embodied her mysteries. Scholars like Maria Gimbutas uncovered Neolithic artifacts that testify to this. Figures and symbols linked to fertility, transformation, and cosmic unity. Even in suppressed Gnostic texts like those found at Nag Hammadi, fragments of the divine feminine, such as Sophia, appear as guardians of secret wisdom. This awakening is not just about gender, it is about balance. The codes of the priestess are returning to weave together what was divided. They remind us that intuition is not lesser than logic, that nurturing is as powerful as conquest, that mystery does not contradict reason but completes it. This re-emergence calls men and women alike to honor the feminine currents within themselves, to listen inwardly, to trust the body, to see divinity reflected in nature's cycles rather than only in rigid structures. And as these codes awaken, the world itself seems to lean into them. Movements of collective healing, ancestral remembrance, sacred sexuality, and earth stewardship are no longer fringe. They are shaping the cultural undercurrent. What was hidden is speaking again, and those who hear are asked to carry it forward. The priestess codes are not merely historical fragments. They are living transmissions, alive in the breath, the womb, the heartbeat of the earth. And as they rise, they invite us to remember that wisdom is not only taught, it is also felt. It is sung. It is carried in silence, waiting for the soul ready enough to listen. The earth still holds memories, and some places breathe with them as if the stones themselves are alive. Sacred sites are not simply ruins of an ancient past. They are living vessels, transmitting frequencies that stretch beyond time. From the Andes to the Pacific, and from the underwater ruins near Yonaguni to the enigmatic Moai of Easter Island, there are whispers of a civilization whose spirit has never left. Many mystics and researchers point toward Lemuria, a vast continent said to have existed in the Pacific before the rise of Atlantis. Though mainstream archaeology resists this narrative, oral traditions from Polynesia, Hawaii, and even indigenous peoples of California still speak of a motherland swallowed by the sea, whose priestesses once carried crystalline wisdom. When you step onto certain sites, Mount Shasta in California, Haleakala in Maui, or the submerged temples off Japan's coast, something awakens in the subtle body. Pilgrims report tingling sensations, altered states of consciousness, and visions of light beings guarding the land. Mount Shasta, in particular, has long been revered as a gateway, said to conceal the remnants of Lemurian temples within its depths. The Hopi and the Klamath tribes both speak of sacred guardians beneath the mountain, keepers of ancient wisdom who retreated there when the Great Flood consumed their homeland. The resonance of these places cannot be explained only by geology. Researchers like Greg Braden and Freddie Silver point out that many sacred sites align with planetary energy lines, what are sometimes called ley lines, channels of Earth's electromagnetic grid. Ancient builders seem to know that the Earth itself is a living temple, with currents of energy flowing through it. By placing stone temples, pyramids, or carved monuments on these points, they amplified Earth's natural frequencies, creating nodes where spirit and matter could meet. The Lemurian legacy is that these temples were never meant to be static monuments. They are portals. They continue to awaken when people approach them with reverence. Even now, healers travel to these places not simply as tourists, but as initiates returning home. They say the stones remember, the waters remember, and in the stillness, if you listen, the land whispers back, "You are not separate from me. You are part of the temple." In the deepest layers of your being, there are codes written not in ink, but in light. Every strand of DNA is more than a biological script. It is a sacred library. Modern science, through projects like the Human Genome Project, has mapped only a fraction of what those sequences hold. Vast regions remain labeled as junk DNA, not because they are meaningless, but because their function still eludes conventional science. Many mystics and esoteric traditions suggest these silent strands are not broken at all. They are dormant, waiting for resonance, waiting for activation. Imagine the ancients who spoke of humanity as beings of light. In Lemurian and Atlantean traditions, they taught that the body was not merely physical, but crystalline. Some researchers of spiritual anthropology, like Barbara Hanclough and Greg Braden, propose that our DNA carries memories of cosmic origins, echoes of Lemurian priestesses, Egyptian initiates, and star-born ancestors who once walked the earth. When activated through meditation, vibration, or alignment with natural harmonics, these sequences begin to remember. There is evidence in science that sound and frequency directly influence DNA. The work of Dr. Peter Garyaev, known for wave genetics, showed that DNA responds to language and coherent frequencies, as though it were both receiver and transmitter of living codes. This aligns with ancient practices where mantras, chants, and sacred songs were not superstition, but deliberate technologies to awaken what lies dormant inside us. Some whisper that the true inheritance of Lemuria and Atlantis is not in stone ruins or forgotten temples, but inside the human vessel. Light codes passed down across ages, embedded into bloodlines, not to be lost, but to be reawakened in the precise era when humanity would need them most. Perhaps that moment is now. Every time you meditate, chant, or stand before the stars in silence, you may be stirring these codes. Every synchronicity, every vision, every sacred dream may be a pulse of ancient DNA stirring in recognition. This is not evolution in the Darwinian sense, but evolution as remembrance, becoming again what we once were. And as these codes begin to hum awake within us, they remind us of something hidden yet eternal, that we were always more than flesh and bone. We were carriers of light, bearing a divine inheritance, waiting for the right time to shine again. Across the world's ancient traditions, whispers remain of a celestial ancestry, a lineage that threads human beings to the stars. Many indigenous peoples of the Pacific, such as the Maori, the Hawaiians, and the Aboriginal Australians, speak of origin stories that begin not solely on Earth, but among the constellations. In the mythic heart of Lemuria, this connection was said to be alive and conscious. The Lemurians believed they were guided by beings from the Pleiades, the star cluster known as the Seven Sisters, whose light seeded both wisdom and memory into the fabric of human life. The Pleiadians appear in countless sacred traditions. The Greeks saw them as the seven daughters of Atlas and Pleione, placed in the heavens by Zeus. The Navajo call them the Diliehe, a place of origin and return. In Japanese lore, they are Subaru, a symbol of unity and guidance. The Lemurians, however, treated them not as distant myths, but as living teachers. According to esoteric accounts preserved through channels like Edgar Cayce and Barbara Marciniak, the Pleiadians brought frequencies of harmony, telepathy, and communal living that became the foundation of Lemurian society. Their presence was not about control, but remembrance. They came to awaken humanity to its divine inheritance. Some modern researchers and spiritual traditions suggest that our DNA still carries signatures of these encounters. Studies in epigenetics reveal that memory is not only carried in stories, but written in the very code of life. What if myth is not metaphor alone, but record? If so, then humanity's pull toward the stars is not just curiosity, it is memory stirring. The Lemurians knew that by meditating with the constellations, by attuning to the music of the spheres, they could activate dormant aspects of their being and align with a higher cosmic rhythm. This is why star lineages continue to surface in dreams, visions, and spontaneous awakenings. Many today who feel a deep resonance with the Pleiades describe a sense of homecoming, as though something long forgotten is rising again. It is not about escaping Earth, but about remembering that Earth itself is part of a larger galactic family. The Lemurian connection with the Pleiadians was not meant to elevate one race above another, but to remind all of us that our origins are interwoven with the stars, and that the same light shines in the heavens and within us. Across the vast Pacific Ocean, scattered like jewels upon the water, lie islands that whisper echoes of an ancient world. Polynesia, Hawaii, and Easter Island are not just remote places of breathtaking beauty. They are living museums, carrying fragments of myths, symbols, and alignments that point back to Lemuria. Scholars often debate whether these myths are merely cultural creations or faint memories of a land swallowed by the sea. Yet the similarities across such distant islands speak of a shared origin, a memory too deep and too consistent to be dismissed as coincidence. In Hawaii, chants and oral traditions describe Mu as the ancestral homeland, a paradise lost beneath the waves. The Kumulipo, the Hawaiian creation chant, speaks of cosmic beginnings, star-born ancestors, and migrations across waters guided not only by celestial navigation, but by an inner knowing. These chants preserve not just cosmology, but fragments of geography, linking the islands to a submerged motherland. When elders speak of sacred mountains like Mauna Kea, rising above the clouds as if to bridge heaven and earth, they echo the Lemurian reverence for natural temples aligned with cosmic forces. Travel further south, and you arrive at Easter Island, Rapa Nui, where the enigmatic Moai statues stand in silent rows. Archaeologists tell us they represent ancestors, but their sheer size and placement suggest something more. Guardians of a memory, keepers of a lost knowledge. Facing inland rather than outward, they seem to watch over a people and a land carrying an invisible legacy. Some oral traditions suggest that the Rapa Nui came from Hiva, a homeland destroyed by catastrophe, another shadow of Lemuria. Polynesian voyaging traditions deepen the mystery. Using star paths, wave patterns, and spiritual intuition, navigators sailed thousands of miles of open sea with uncanny precision. It was not only a practical skill, but a sacred inheritance, as though encoded memory and cosmic guidance merged to ensure survival. Their canoes became vessels of continuity, carrying the essence of a lost continent into new shores. Modern genetic studies even show intriguing patterns. Polynesians share markers connecting them not only across their vast ocean domain, but hinting at deeper, older migrations, possibly from lands now submerged. Here, myth and science converge, suggesting that what we call folklore may be fragments of truth. The Pacific is more than water. It is a mirror reflecting a sunken world. Its islands are not accidents, but the scattered mountain peaks of what once was. And when you stand on their shores, listening to the waves, it is as though Lemuria itself still breathes through the ocean's song, reminding us of origins humanity has not yet remembered. Dreams often come like whispers from a place beyond time, carrying fragments of something both familiar and forgotten. For many, the connection to Lemuria is not found in history books or carved upon stone, but in the silent language of memory that stirs when the body rests and the soul roams free. In the dreamtime, what the Aboriginal peoples of Australia have long described as the eternal realm of creation, there lies a bridge between waking life and the soul's long journey through many lifetimes. This is not mere imagination, but a reawakening of remembrance that stretches across incarnations. When people describe past life recall, they often speak of vivid dreams that feel more real than waking moments, where landscapes, voices, and even languages flow naturally, though they've never been learned in this life. Many of these dreams take place on lush islands, in radiant temples, or by oceans that seem alive with spirit. Some researchers, such as Carl Jung, spoke of a collective unconscious, where archetypes and ancestral memories reside. Could it be that Lemuria survives in this shared memory field, encoded in the very blueprint of our souls? Across cultures, countless individuals recount similar visions of crystalline cities shimmering beneath the waves, of golden light temples that once stood high upon sacred peaks, of ceremonies guided by star beings or elder priests who spoke in tones of vibration rather than words. These recurring patterns are not easily dismissed as coincidence. They suggest a deeper layer of consciousness, where Lemuria continues to communicate with us, not through artifacts, but through resonance. Meditation and dream journaling often unlock these fragments. When one records their dreams consistently, symbols emerge: spirals, suns, serpents, and ancient oceans. These images align strikingly with those found in Polynesian, Hawaiian, and Aboriginal lore. Spiritual traditions remind us that remembering is not about escaping this life, but about understanding how past lives have shaped our present purpose. Lemuria, then, is not a distant legend. It is a frequency, calling us back to our forgotten wholeness. And when the dreamtime speaks, it is as though the soul is whispering, You have walked here before, you have sung these songs, and you carry this light still. In those echoes, the memory of Lemuria awakens, reminding us that the ancient dream is not gone. It is waiting to be lived again. They say memory is fragile, like smoke in the wind. But there are places on this earth where memory does not fade. It crystallizes. Within the stones, the mountains, the shimmering lattices of quartz and granite, there is an eternal archive waiting to be touched. Ancient traditions have long whispered that crystals are not simply inert objects, but vessels of consciousness, transmitters of subtle energy, and keepers of records that outlive empires. In Lemurian lore, the people believed that when their world began to collapse beneath the waves, they encoded their wisdom into the crystalline structures of the earth itself. A library not written on parchment, but etched into vibrational light. Science, too, has caught echoes of this truth. Quartz, the most common crystal on Earth, is a remarkable conductor of energy. It vibrates with such stability that entire technologies have been built upon it. From watches to radios to modern computers. If quartz can hold the pulse of time itself and transmit signals across distance, is it really so far-fetched that it could also store intention, memory, and spiritual knowledge? The ancients did not see crystals as dead minerals, but as living companions. In every shimmer of light refracted through their angles, they sensed the whispers of another world. Archaeologists have uncovered sacred sites where stones were positioned not merely for shelter, but for resonance, as if their builders understood the harmonic relationship between crystalline matter and the human mind. Some believe that Easter Island's Moai statues, with their embedded volcanic stone, or the standing stones of Polynesian marae, acted as anchors of memory, silent keepers of stories and ceremonies that refused to be lost. In shamanic practice, crystals were carried not only as amulets, but as keys, a way to unlock visions, retrieve past lives, and open the memory of the soul itself. When people today hold Lemurian seed crystals, long striated quartz pieces said to be programmed with the wisdom of a vanished world, many report a sensation of déjà vu, as though the stone itself is remembering them. Perhaps this is the deeper mystery, that memory is not only in us, but around us, woven into the very skeleton of the planet. The stones are not silent. They wait. They vibrate with a patience beyond time, calling us to listen. Legends whisper that nothing truly vanishes. Civilizations may collapse, but their essence lingers, waiting for the right season to re-emerge. And many spiritual traditions affirm that Lemuria is not a myth frozen in the past, but a living current rising again in our time. The return is not of cities or temples in the physical sense, but of the energies, frequencies, and soul memories that once animated them. You can feel it in the collective pull toward compassion, in the yearning for unity, and in the sudden fascination with ancient wisdom that modern culture once dismissed as fantasy. When clairvoyants like Rudolf Steiner spoke of Lemuria, they hinted at cycles, world ages where forgotten energies return to the surface. Indigenous Hawaiian traditions echo this, describing Mu as the ancient foundation of aloha, a resonance of deep interconnectedness. And now, as the earth moves through its own shift, the Lemurian vibration is stirring within countless people who feel inexplicably called to heal, to channel, to remember. Notice the rise of crystal grids, sound therapies, and heart-based communities. These are not simply trends. They are fragments of Lemurian consciousness breaking through the modern world. Even science, in its own way, affirms this. Quantum entanglement and the holographic principle suggest that memory is not locked in the brain alone, but woven into the very fabric of reality. To those sensitive enough, the planet itself is beginning to speak again, and what it whispers sounds strikingly familiar. And so, many report dreams where they walk on soft shores of glowing sand. Others feel sudden tears when they hear the ocean, as if remembering a home they cannot place. Some carry birthmarks or innate abilities linked to healing, telepathy, or communion with nature, as though the soul coded itself with Lemurian imprints before birth. These are not coincidences, they are awakenings, signs that the collective dream of Lemuria is rising within us now. Perhaps this return is less about rebuilding and more about remembering, literally stitching the fragments of our ancient wholeness back into the human spirit. For the energies that once wove harmony between ocean, land, and stars are seeking to do so again, but this time through us. And when enough souls awaken to this resonance, Lemuria will not be a lost world. It will be a living song we embody here and now. Throughout history, humanity has lived under different celestial influences, each age carrying its own lessons, challenges, and gifts. Today, we stand within the dawning of the age of Aquarius, a time that mystics and astrologers long foresaw as a collective turning point. The Aquarian current is not merely about astrology. It is about consciousness itself. It is about the rising tide of awareness that demands truth, unity, and liberation from illusions. Unlike the Piscean age, which emphasized faith, hierarchy, and veiled mysteries, the Aquarian age invites transparency, self-sovereignty, and the recognition that we are each vessels of the divine. This shift is not abstract. It is already transforming how we think, how we organize, and how we dream of the future. Aquarius, ruled by Uranus, is the awakener. It shakes the foundations of old systems so that something freer can be born. That is why institutions of religion, politics, and even science, which once held rigid authority, are now being questioned more deeply than ever before. People are not content with blind belief. They seek direct experience. They long for gnosis, inner knowing, and the remembrance that truth lives within them. This is the essence of the Aquarian vibration. Knowledge that flows like water, accessible to all, not locked away in temples or archives. The connection between Aquarius and ancient wisdom is striking. Lemurian traditions spoke of a time when humanity lived in harmony, guided by collective resonance rather than domination. Hermetic writings hinted at a future when hidden laws of energy and mind would be revealed to all seekers. Even the Christian mystics whispered of an age to come, when the Spirit would be poured out universally. These visions all converge in this Aquarian moment. Why does it matter? Because the energies rising now ask us to embody what we once only studied. It is no longer enough to know that consciousness creates reality. We are being asked to live it. It is no longer enough to admire synchronicities. We must align with them and follow where they lead. The Aquarian connection is the bridge between the ancient wisdom of the past and the awakened humanity of the future. To walk across it is to accept responsibility for the light you carry, to understand that your awakening is part of a vast symphony of souls awakening together. And in that recognition, you step into the very reason you were born in this age. They say the soul remembers more than the mind could ever carry. Across lifetimes, across worlds, it holds an echo of places long forgotten. Mu, what some call Lemuria, was one of those places, a continent said to have stretched across the Pacific long before recorded history. Many dismiss it as myth, but fragments of its memory linger, woven into oral traditions from Polynesia to South America. and whispered in esoteric teachings that speak of an age when humanity lived in harmony with the earth and the stars. Even in theosophical writings, Lemuria was described as a cradle of an ancient root race, one that embodied unity with nature and deep spiritual wisdom. And perhaps this is why, when people today step into meditation, regression, or moments of sudden remembrance, they feel an inexplicable pull, as though they once walked its shores. These glimpses are often not grandiose. A fleeting vision of crystalline waters, the sensation of warm volcanic soil under bare feet, a song carried by waves that feels like it has no origin, yet resonates deep in the chest. The mind may resist, but the soul leans in, whispering, "You were there." The return to Mu is not about a physical land rising again from beneath the ocean, though some legends suggest fragments of it remain scattered as islands. Instead, it is about energy, about a frequency that is reawakening in our collective consciousness. The same values that guided those ancient souls, harmony, compassion, reverence for the earth, and awareness of the unseen, are the very qualities humanity is being asked to reclaim now. Those who feel called to this memory are often the ones drawn to healing, to protecting nature, to listening to the subtle currents beneath ordinary life. It's as if the soul carries a mission from that forgotten epoch, now resurfacing in this Aquarian age, not as nostalgia, but as purpose. And so, when you feel a sudden recognition in symbols of the ocean, in crystals, in chants or ceremonies that awaken something indescribable within you, pause. That memory is not imagination. It is inheritance. It is the soul reminding you that your journey has been longer than you think, that you've walked these paths before, and that the wisdom of Mu still flows in your veins, waiting to be lived again. The story of humanity is woven through two great myths that are more than myths. Lemuria and Atlantis stand as twin mirrors, each reflecting a path the human soul might take. One represents harmony, communion with nature, and the gentle unfolding of spiritual consciousness. The other symbolizes brilliance, innovation, mastery of energy, but also the temptation of power and the fall that comes when wisdom is cast aside. Together, they are not simply lost lands, but archetypes, timeless lessons etched into the soul's memory. In many traditions, Lemuria is remembered as a cradle of peace, a civilization said to stretch across the Pacific, where beings lived in deep resonance with the Earth's rhythms. According to esoteric texts like those explored by Helena Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, the Lemurians were less bound by material form, luminous beings who could sense the breath of the cosmos through intuition rather than intellect. Their downfall, as told in theosophy and modern mystic accounts, came not from ambition, but from a gradual descent into density, a forgetting of their subtle nature. Atlantis, on the other hand, as described by Plato in the Timaeus and Critias, shone with splendor, a kingdom of extraordinary knowledge and power. Esoteric lore suggests that the Atlanteans mastered technologies of crystal energy, harnessing forces of the ether in ways that surpass our modern imagination. But with their brilliance came pride, and with pride, corruption. Rather than align their gifts with the divine mind, many turned toward domination, using the forces of nature as tools of control. The result was cataclysm, floods, fire, and the ocean swallowing their great cities, leaving only fragments of memory carried through Egyptian, Mayan, and Vedic traditions. When seen together, Lemuria and Atlantis form a living parable. One shows the danger of forgetting the material, of drifting too far from grounded being. The other warns of forgetting the spiritual, of chasing power without wisdom. Humanity stands again at this threshold. We are inheritors of both paths, carrying within us the Lemurian call to compassion and the Atlantean thirst for knowledge. The question is whether we can now integrate the two, embodying both the softness of heart and the sharpness of mind, the intuition of spirit and the brilliance of science. For the soul remembers both. And perhaps that is why these stories still call to us. They are not just about where we came from, but about where we are headed, and whether this time we will choose balance over ruin. In every age, prophecy whispers like wind over water, carrying fragments of memory across the seas of time. The idea of return, of cycles repeating, is not simply a story to comfort or to warn. It is the rhythm of existence itself. Ancient cultures across the world, from the Hopi in North America to the Maya in Central America, from the Vedic seers of India to the sages of Egypt, spoke of an age of balance that would one day arrive. They did not believe history was a straight line. They knew it curved like a circle, spiraling back toward harmony after long seasons of forgetting. The Hopi prophecies, passed down through oral tradition, speak of 4 worlds. 3 have fallen, destroyed by fire, flood, and upheaval, and we now walk in the 4th. But they also tell of a 5th world, one born from purification, where humanity learns once more to live in balance with the earth. The Mayan calendars, particularly the long count, were often misinterpreted as predicting an end in 2012. Yet what they spoke of was transition, the turning of a great cosmic wheel, a moment when the hidden knowledge of cycles would surface again, calling us back to remembrance. In Egypt, the priests of Heliopolis spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods and men walked together in harmony. It was not nostalgia, but a prophecy that what once was would rise again. Similarly, in the Vedic tradition, the Yugas describe epochs of light and shadow. The Kali Yuga, the age of confusion and spiritual decline, was never the final chapter. Beyond it lies Satya Yuga, the age of truth and harmony, when balance is restored. Today, these prophecies feel less like distant myth and more like a pulse moving through our present world. The crumbling of systems, the awakening of consciousness, the surge of both chaos and creativity. These are not signs of the end, but of rebalancing. The ancients understood that imbalance can only stretch so far before the pendulum swings back. That swing is what we are living now. The prophecy of return is not about waiting for saviors or fearing destruction. It is about remembering that humanity carries the seed of harmony within itself. Every choice toward compassion, every act of courage, every remembrance of spirit is part of that rebalancing. The old world is not being erased, it is being retuned so that the song of creation can be heard in harmony once more. They say memory is not only of the mind, but of the soul. And some memories are older than nations, older than scripture, older than the stones of any cathedral. They live in our blood and bones, carried through lifetimes like a secret song. Mu, or Lemuria, as later traditions called it, is one of these ancient echoes. Though archaeologists dismiss it as myth, and historians insist it never existed, countless indigenous traditions, mystics, and spiritual teachers have spoken of a sunken land in the Pacific, a civilization devoted not to conquest, but to harmony. To understand Mu is not to reconstruct ruins, but to feel into the wisdom it carried. It was a culture said to be rooted in balance with the Earth's energies, with the cycles of nature, with the rhythms of the stars. Lemuria's people, according to esoteric traditions preserved by figures like James Churchward and Helena Blavatsky, understood energy not as something to exploit, but as something to live in alignment with. Their temples were not built to dominate, but to mirror the constellations above. Their lives were not organized by commerce or war, but by ceremony, music, and healing practices that flowed from the earth itself. Whether literal or symbolic, Mu becomes a lesson for us. When civilizations lose their relationship with nature, they unravel. When humanity forgets that spirit and matter are not separate, we begin to fracture. Many seers describe Mu's fall not as sudden, but as gradual, a drift from remembrance into forgetfulness, a slide from unity into division, and so the ocean covered what was once whole, sealing it in myth. Yet even in its disappearance, Mu leaves us with a map not of geography, but of choice. The choice to return to harmony, the choice to remember that humanity's destiny is not to dominate the earth, but to walk with it as kin. Today, as we face climate unraveling, fractured communities, and spiritual amnesia, the lessons of Mu rise like a tide. They whisper that no empire, however brilliant, can stand if it forgets the sacred bond between life and life. They remind us that the future is not secured by power, but by remembrance. And perhaps this is why the myth still calls to us. Not to prove whether Mu once existed in time, but to awaken the part of us that remembers it always has and always will exist in spirit. Beneath the surface of myth and memory, there is an idea that Lemuria was never truly lost. Its lands may have vanished beneath the waters, its cities may have dissolved into sand and coral, but the essence of Lemuria, the light it carried, still resides in humanity. Cultures around the world speak of a golden age, a time when people lived in harmony with the earth and each other, when the boundary between spirit and matter was thin and luminous. The Vedic texts call it Satya Yuga, the age of truth. Polynesian chants speak of Hiva, a homeland of light that guided the ancestors. Even in Christian mysticism, echoes of Eden hold the same vibration. Paradise not as a physical place, but as a state of being within the human heart. When we say Lemuria was never truly lost, it is because what it represented cannot be drowned. The light within every being carries that memory. It is the same spark that mystics across traditions describe, the Atman in Hindu thought, the inner flame in Hermetic texts, the divine spark in Gnosticism. Each of these teachings tells us that civilizations may fall, temples may crumble, and even stars may burn out, but the eternal light within is untouched. Perhaps that is why so many feel a deep recognition when they hear the word Lemuria. It is less about geography and more about resonance. The soul remembers what the mind cannot. The gentle harmony of that age, compassion, unity, reverence for nature, still whispers through our intuition. It speaks when we sit silently under starlight, or when we feel a strange longing in the ocean's roar. And so, the real work is not to search endlessly for ruins on the seafloor. It is to awaken what those ruins symbolize inside us. To remember that we carry Lemuria's essence, its purity, its wisdom, its trust in life, in our own hearts. If we choose to live from that space, then Lemuria is reborn every day. Because Lemuria was not destroyed, it was entrusted to us, to remember, to live it again, and to keep its light alive so that no flood, no fire, no empire of illusion can ever erase it. Beneath the noise of our modern age, where machines hum and screens glow endlessly, there is a softer, older call that many cannot explain. It arrives in dreams, in visions, in sudden longings for lands we have never seen. It is the call of Lemuria, not as a place confined to myth, but as a living current, a vibration that still courses through the soul of the earth. The ancients never believed civilizations truly died. They believed they transformed, shedding one skin to grow another. And so, while the cities of Mu may have sunk beneath the waters, the essence of Lemuria has never truly been extinguished. It exists in the ether, in the Akashic records, and in the very resonance of your own heart. Think of how many cultures separated by oceans speak of a paradise lost, a homeland drowned, a golden age forgotten, the Polynesian chants of Hawaii, the Hindu tales of lost continents, the Hopi memory of the third world swallowed by floods, even Plato's vision of Atlantis. These are not isolated myths, but fragments of a shared memory. They are whispers from the eternal civilization that was Lemuria, reminders scattered across time so that one day, when humanity was ready, we would piece them together again. Helena Blavatsky, in The Secret Doctrine, wrote of Lemuria as the cradle of the third root race, beings of light and subtle form, whose legacy still echoes in our intuitive gifts and spiritual hunger. Whether one takes her words as literal history or as esoteric allegory, the teaching remains the same. Lemuria is not gone. It is within us, waiting to be remembered. Every act of kindness, every moment of unity, every time we choose empathy over division, we embody the Lemurian spirit. Their civilization was said to live in harmony with nature, guided not by conquest, but by cooperation. Today, in an age of division, remembering Lemuria is more than nostalgia. It is survival. It is the blueprint for a future where we recognize the earth not as a resource to be drained, but as a living mother whose rhythms we are meant to honor. When you feel the ocean calling you, when you hear the wind singing through the trees, when you stand barefoot on the soil and feel peace rise up through your body, that is Lemuria reaching out. The eternal civilization still speaks, not in ruins or temples, but in the quiet knowing that home was never lost. It has always been within you, waiting to be awakened. And perhaps that is why Lemuria still calls, not to pull us back into the past, but to remind us of the future we are destined to create. And so, the story of Lemuria is not just a myth of the past. It is a mirror of the soul, a reminder that within you lies the same light, the same wisdom, the same call to awaken. The ancients left us signs not so we would worship them, but so we would remember ourselves. Do not let the flame stop here. Continue the voyage with us. Watch our other videos. More of the pieces will fall into place. Subscribe so you never lose the path. Share these revelations, for you may be the sign someone else has been waiting for. And comment below. Your voice matters, and your journey is part of the great tapestry we are weaving together. Welcome to the Hidden Voyage. Welcome home, Soul Whisper and Soul Creator. The Hidden Voyage